let's change. Let's go to the city because we have a guest sitting here in studio. Tommy Wells, you came hobbling in, Mr. Council Member. What's happened here?
Well, most Friday
You
mornings.
can't be running for mayor if you're hobbling for mayor.
Most Friday mornings I play some hoops. This morning we had an NBA guy out there.
I don't want to hear a long story.
Mark Davis. And so I had to work extra hard. You know, he played for Chicago. And he's close to my age. He's a little bit younger. But so I worked pretty hard on the basketball court, and I have an injury.
Does this put a dent in your livable, walkable theme if you're going to be hobbling around?
Well, let's see how the ad
Livable, hobbable.
Right.
You can join the conversation today by calling 1-800-433-8850. You can email us at kojo@wamu.org or give us a tweet at Kojo Show. Well, Mr. Wells, you've been running for mayor. The poll this week, the Washington Post poll came out. It basically said 76% of the people didn't choose incumbent Mayor Vincent Gray, 20% or so undecided. Everybody else divided among you, a gaggle of people running for mayor. Gray got 24%, you were around 11%. That's a lot. How are you going to make all that up?
Well, it's clear that the race is wide open, that for an incumbent mayor that's run citywide twice, to only have 24% of the vote, that tells you that, you know, he's well known and 75% of the city won't vote for him. So I believe that someone will break out of the pack. You know, I expect it to be me. And I think the way you make it up, almost 60% of the city really don't know who I am. And so there's a lot of room to grow on this. And I feel confident that, especially in an election that's about integrity, election about confidence in our government, I'm the only one not taking corporate dollars. I have a reputation or a brand for being an honest legislator. So
on that point, 54% of the polls said that Mayor Gray, they did not think Mayor Gray was either honest or trustworthy. That's down from 61%, so he's making progress, as he said. But that's a significant thing.
Well, and I think there's a lot more that will be coming out. A lot other people were involved in the chartered health care scandal that cost us about $40 million. That was run by Jeffrey Thompson, who funded the shadow campaign. I think that a lot of other things, I don't think anybody's pushing the pause button over at the U.S. Attorney's Office.
And council member, you talked about perhaps your biggest issue is getting your name out there. And obviously the easiest way to do that in politics is with money, with the campaign donations. And when you look at the filing records, you are well behind your rivals when you talk about Muriel Bowser and Jack Evans. And you've mentioned the fact that you're not taking corporate contributions, but when you just look at the cash on hand, you know, Muriel Bowser has $750,000. You have, I believe, $130,000 according to the latest filings. Are you going to have enough money to compete with your rivals?
Well, Patrick, I appreciate this because you did a story on NPR of the corrupting influence of corporate donations to the council, how it affects votes and undermines confidence in our government. So the fact that both Muriel and Jack have raised around $1 million, and I've raised about $500,000, and I'm dead even with them, tells you that, yes, I can run a campaign. And then, you know, the other thing is that, and Tom, you know, is the historian here, but almost everybody that raises the most money.
Translation. He's older. He's much older.
Almost every candidate that raises the most money, from John Ray to most recently Adrian Fenty, loses. So I don't think this is a city where the voters can be bought.
But you are well behind your. This isn't. I mean, you admit that it takes money to run a campaign, and that if you look at your burn rate, how much you're bringing in versus how much you're spending. Last quarter, for example, you spent more than you raised. I mean, will you actually just have enough money to run a citywide campaign?
I've got more money than what the winner of Minneapolis, you know, raised. I think that
only Tommy Wells would know that.
So I've got enough money to win this race. I've got all my overhead paid for. Every dollar I raise now goes to voter contact. And let me tell you, this is not going to be a race, and it almost never it is in D.C., on who raises the most money. Other people focus on that. I've got volunteers. I've got over 400 volunteers that have called in to do work. And if you come by the campaign office, it is a buzz. And it really is about, you know, certainly running a race that is motivated by of what people want to do. It's a race of ideas. It's not a race of money.
Okay, let's talk about some of those ideas. some of the mayor's people tell me that all of you talk about the ethics stuff, which is unresolved with the U.S. Attorney still investigating, but because you can't really criticize the mayor and separate yourself from the things he's done in continuing the reforms that first began with Tony Williams and then Adrian Fenty. So if you could, in the most distilled way possible, what's the difference for you in terms of one big public policy issue that would be different for you if you were mayor and Vincent Gray were not?
Well, I think one of the biggest differences is that I'd be the leader of education reform. Vince Gray is sits in the sidelines and says, and it's all focused on Kaya Henderson and other folks.
But didn't he do early childhood as the council chairman?
Well, frankly, when I was on the school board is when we started programs for 3-year-olds in our schools all day.
Okay.
So that started with me on the school board with Dr. Janey. And then Vince Gray came in with pre-K for all. But I started that. And so, in terms of school reform, I've shown in Ward 6 where we have a waiting list at every elementary school, and we're adding 3 new public elementary schools by working with parents, where this administration is closing elementary schools across the river and elsewhere, that I can do this. Now, let me tell you, I'm inclined to keep Kaya Henderson as the chancellor of the school system, because education reform will be led by me. It won't be, say, well, that's, under Kaya Henderson. I know that I can change the school system. I've done it in Ward 6. We've got a waiting list of families to get into our schools. We're adding public elementary schools. And under this administration, they're putting children on buses to schools for the first time in years, over at River Terrace, where they closed the school. The gold standard of a neighborhood is having a school in walking distance to every family that they can get there, say, in 10 minutes. It's a reason to live there, not a reason to leave there. I know I can do it because I've done it.
Certainly for elementary schools that would be true, but the many of the parents around town who've talked to me and people I've talked to, including the chancellor, is what is the city going to do for the bridge time of the middle schools?
Absolutely.
Everybody comes to the D.C. schools, and then many parents take their kids and run to the suburbs.
And that
for
is
the middle schools.
And that
you
is
have a plan
exactly
for
where
that?
I'll provide the leadership. We will have a mix between the traditional public and the charters, that parents will have a choice, but they'll also be able to get first preference. That parents need predictability. First, they need to know where their child's going to elementary school as a matter of right, and that it's a good school. But for moving forward, they need predictability. And the fact that this administration's not been able to blend the resources of the charter schools in an accountable way with the traditional public schools is a lack of leadership at the top. That will be different. I'll be in charge of the schools, and I know that I've certainly reformed the schools at the elementary school level, no matter who's in charge, and that's why I'll keep Kaya Henderson if she wants to stay, and she can work under my program.
So are you 100% behind neighborhood preference when it comes to charter schools?
Actually, I was the one that originated that. Of course I am. You don't want to consign neighborhoods to not have families where they have a choice to live somewhere else. You consign neighborhoods, but I think it's not just geographic, but we need to have an integration, knitting together the charter middle schools along with where they're doing a lot of innovation. Middle school's hard in the sense that almost no urban area has figured out middle schools very well. We only have 2 or 3 middle schools that are really middle schools of first choice in DCPS, but we've got a number of charter schools like KIPP, where their first choice charter schools are doing a great job, but they're not integrated with traditional public schools. The taxpayers don't expect, say, you're in one camp or the other camp. They expect that their dollars go together to create education choices for families to stay here. And that's where this administration has failed, and that's the difference. I'll be in charge of education for D.C. I've got a plan to do it, and I know that I can because I've done it.
Muriel Bowser, who's one of the opponents in Ward 4 council member, says she would like to see middle schools like Alice Deal, which is there in Ward 3, all over the city. Do you have any substantive difference with Muriel Bowser?
Well, I would like to see Banneker all over the city. I'd like to see Wilson. I mean, it's easy to say, well, this school has done well, but it takes the hard work of getting there with the parents, working together to say what will create a school of first choice for you. And that's how you do it.
That's Councilmember Tommy Wells from Ward 6. He's a candidate for mayor here in the District of Columbia. You can join the conversation by calling 1-800-433-8850. Email email us at kojo@wamu.org, or just send us a tweet at Kojo Show. Let's see, we've got some calls for you. We've got a caller. Let me see if I can work this system here. All right. We're going to talk to Philip.
Yeah, hi,
Philip,
Tom.
you're on the air. Do you have a question for the council member, candidate for mayor, and hobbling candidate? Do you play basketball?
Hi, Tom. This is Philip Pennell from Ward 8.
Okay, I'm going to put the clock on you, Philip.
Okay, I'm just calling to say that tomorrow Ward 8 will be the place to be because it will be the Ward 8 Democrats will be the first official Democratic Party organization to hold an endorsement forum and vote for mayor.
Where's it going to be?
It's going to be at Turner Elementary School at 3264 Stanton Road, Southeast.
Are the candidates going to be allowed to speak first? Are they going to have a moment before you vote?
The voting will be from 12 to 2, and the forum will start at noon.
All right. Well, Council Member, in the Washington Post poll, you didn't do very well among African-American voters. You acknowledge that yourself. Across the river, you speak to Philip Pennell and the people who live across the river.
Well, the first thing is that you're right. I'm leading among white voters, and I'm not doing as well as I should and could with black voters. And Phil Pennell is a friend, and Phil and I have talked a bit, and what is not out there is my story. You know, I started off as a social worker for D.C. for 6 years. I've worked in every neighborhood of this city. I've worked with all types of families in this city. And a lot of people just don't know that story. And Phil Pennell has been very helpful to me in, Phil Pennell is one of the leaders to help transform neighborhoods, and he's been a leader for our city.
All right, good. Well, thanks for calling, Phil. We're going to go to Norma. Norma, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Tom. Mr. Wells, you were not at the CSX Virginia Tunnel Community Meeting with Mayor Gray last night, so your Ward 6 constituents, such as myself, were unable to ask you this simple question. Would you allow CSX to dig a trench on Virginia Avenue with running trains as mayor of Washington, D.C.?
And we should just tell people who don't know what this is. CSX is looking to replace, I think, in late 1800s tunnel near the Capitol by digging up the Virginia Avenue for more than a mile or so and then putting in a double-decker type tunnel. And the people who live around there, hundreds of people turned out last night. A, why weren't you there in your ward?
Well,
and B, what do you think?
First off, it seems like Vince Gray just discovered this issue. This has been going on for a long time. I've had meetings with neighbors, and I met with Eleanor Holmes Norton. We had a big public meeting just a few weeks ago. And what I've done is I've, first of all, put in a letter asking for them to reroute the trains. And we've got a letter back from the Federal Highways folks saying that they're not going to do that. The other thing I did is I got the council where we're passing a resolution asking for a congressional oversight hearing. I've been actively involved in this issue. I'm trying to really mitigate what CSX is looking to do there. I'm very concerned about it. I didn't discover this issue last night. I've been working on it, and that's why the council already has a resolution going to Congress saying you need to have oversight hearing. Congress can get the answers that the council has been unable to get.
What power does the city have? What power does the city have to do anything other than to lobby?
City has almost none except for some powers around permitting, things like that. And so we can frustrate it for a while, and that's what I'm trying to do, so that I really believe that there was an alternative. At least I worked with the community who had done a lot of research. We thought that they could reroute the trains at least through construction. Now, I've got back from the Federal Highway folks saying, no, we can't do that, or Federal Transit folks. But I think we pursue it, and that's why I've asked Congress to have an oversight hearing.
Did you not go to working with Eleanor Holmes Norton? And just be political, did you not go to the meeting last night because it was the mayor's chance to be there?
Well, the mayor is just coming to this issue in the middle of a political season.
And so why did you not go?
So he just discovered the issue because it was the mayor's show. Okay. I've been working on this with the neighbors, and I don't want to be part of that show.
That will be a big impact on Capitol Hill.
Absolutely.
People work there and live there. So let's take another caller though, because I like the callers asking the questions. This is Oscar. Are you there, Oscar?
Yes. Good afternoon. Parent of a middle school student. Three quick questions. One, too much testing. If you're elected mayor, would you cut back on the amount of testing that is done in D.C. public schools? Two, do you plan to keep Kai Henderson? And three, do you believe in giving more local control to principals to run their schools in a way that is not necessarily so tied to central administration?
Thank you very much. He did say he would keep Kaya Henderson unless she didn't want to stay.
So the first thing is you're exactly right. The emphasis on testing is undermining our schools. Nobody knows the test scores of Sidwell Friends where the president sends his children. The most important measure of a school is where do parents want to send their children and who do they trust to educate their children. That's the first thing. Second thing is absolutely, it's not just local control, but it's hiring leaders that are entrepreneurial with the neighborhood. They'll get out of their school, that will meet with parents and say, are we providing a school that you want to send your children to? It's about entrepreneurial leadership and giving them the power to do that. It means local control. You're exactly, Oscar, on the right track. In terms of Kaya Henderson, of course, I'm inclined to keep her. We've been churning through, different people running the school system. It undermines reform, it undermines continuity, but the difference will be is that I'll be in charge of the schools, and I believe we can be entrepreneurial with her there.
Thank you, Oscar.
And Councilmember, to switch gears here, one of the most contentious votes that I can remember covering the council was the Walmart living wage bill that came before earlier this year, and you voted against this bill. This was one of the biggest votes we've had in a long time, and that would have ensured that workers working for these retailers, and it was specific criteria that would have essentially targeted Walmart and other big retailers for a $12.50 an hour wage. You voted against this bill. Now, you've positioned yourself as a fighter for working class families. Why did you vote against this?
I appreciate that question because sometimes we have to just not do the political choice. We have to do what's right. Writing legislation specifically for one corporation is not a good way to legislate. And frankly, this bill was symbolic, would not have helped anybody for at least 4 years. So what I told the advocates and I told the city, I will come back with raising the minimum wage for everyone in the city. So after the Walmart bill died, I went back and I got 9 co-introducers for raising the minimum wage, indexing it so that people don't have to come back hat in hand. And so I brought it back, and initially it was at $12.50. When I saw that we had 9 that we could sustain a veto, because the mayor said we need a study. Let's not do it now.
Well, the mayor said raise it to $10 immediately and then do a study.
Oh, he came in afterwards.
Right.
But
he signed the bill
study.
this week. He signed the bill.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But this was done by the council. And so I did exactly what I said I'd do. And we're raising the minimum wage now for everyone. And instead of waiting.
Well, this was a symbolic vote. Why did you vote against it?
Well, because it was a symbolic gesture. It didn't help anity. And so
it wouldn't have helped the workers?
No, it didn't. It would take any new store, any store that was already opening. And frankly, the CFO, opening the new stores were going to open before the bill went into place, so they'd be grandfathered in. And for 4 years. Walmart had said they won't open another store. Target said they wouldn't do anything else. Wegmans said they weren't coming in. And so the fact that nothing would happen for 4 years did not help the residents of the city. So this minimum wage bill that I championed, along with the other council members, to give credit to everyone, that we're going to have a much higher minimum wage. And Walmart opened the stores, and they're paying the higher minimum wage, and that they'll pay. It helped about 30,000, if not 40,000 residents, where the Walmart bill would have helped 3,000.
The council, clearly all the council members were for raising the minimum wage. It was just how to do it. It's now been done. It'll go up to $11.50 by 2016, which is one of the highest in the nation. And the federal wage is still $7.25, where Virginia is staying.
It's better to be smart and then just political.
Let me ask you another wage issue. There has not been a police raise. You're the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. The police officers who are out every day on the streets of the city have not had raises. They've had incremental raises that they get through their union contract, but they have not had raises. And the chief was here last week, and she said, well, I want my officers to have raises up to the city. We've got a few more issues, it's compensation issues. Why is it so hard for the elected leaders of this city to say, we're not going to give you this raise, guys. We're going to fight you over it for year after year after year?
It's not the elected leaders. It's Vince Gray and then Adrian Fenty before him. When I took over the chairmanship of this committee, I said the number one threat to public safety is the fact that we have not given our officers a raise. That we want to be able to attract the best employees, the best officers, and we want to retain them. They've not had a raise in 7 years. And so a year ago at the awards dinner, Vince Gray said, you'll get a raise in a couple of weeks. And it didn't happen. So what I did is I introduced...
Do you know what the issue is? The chief said it was compensation.
The issue goes back to how does the city want to pay a pay increase based on what they would have made pay increases over the past 7 years.
Retroactive
and so finally I said, I don't want to mess around anymore. I introduced a bill that said if they can't come to an agreement on a new contract, the city will pay cost of living going back 7 years each year. And so that our officers will know that they're going to get a raise one way or the other. Don't go to Montgomery County. Don't go to Prince George's County. Stay here in the District of Columbia. We need you here. And the elected officials, the majority of us, do want you to get a raise, and we'll make it happen.
Okay, let's take another caller. We're going to talk to Liz. Liz, you there?
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. My question for Mr. Wells has to do with neighborhood preference for charter schools. And my concern as a parent is that if there is students in the neighborhood who are looking at charters because of the convenience and because of the level of education, et cetera, that there are some schools in our city that also offer language-specific programs. And what if there are people who are very interested in being in that school for that one reason versus somebody in the neighborhood who isn't as committed to the specialty of that school, what does that do for those students if, they're being taught in a language that isn't of interest to them for 2.5 days of the week or something like that?
Mr. Wells, go ahead. Let him answer the
Liz,
question.
I like that question because that gets to really the point is that we shouldn't have anything be monolithic. We are moving into an era of choice and flexibility. For the charter schools to say, no, we will never give neighborhood preference, that's it, I think that's wrong. I think there's some charter schools that should be given that option. That if they want to offer neighborhood preference, if you close the elementary school where there's no other elementary school in walking distance, and you bring in a high-performing charter school, and then tell the parents, but no, you can no longer go to this school as a matter of right, I think that's infuriating. And so we do have great alternative charter schools like Yu Ying and some others that are language specific where it does not make sense to do neighborhood preference. You're exactly right. But just the one size fits all is not the way to go.
That's Tommy Wells, candidate for mayor, Ward 6 council member. I'm Tom Sherwood from NBC4, sitting in for Kojo Namdi, who's on assignment. And Patrick Madden is here as the guest analyst and has the question we've all been waiting to ask.
Yes, I think if we can talk about the marijuana legislation. Obviously, that's been one of the big...
Every baby boomer in America is now listening.
Right, one of the high-profile issues. One point that's been raised, and I've watched some of the hearings, is obviously the issue of making it a civic fine, $25, as opposed to a criminal penalty that obviously carries much stricter penalties. But the police are concerned about this issue of when you actually issue the fine and you ask the person for their ID, they're not required to show it to you. They just are required to give you a name. And it can be pretty much any name you want.
Patrick Madden.
I could say
Tommy Wells.
Right.
Tom Sherwood.
And as long as it's not blatantly fake or obvious, that's it, essentially. And the notice will go out. And they say, according to their statistics, and again, this is coming from the police, that 85% or 90% default rate on these citations. So it almost seems like it's a backdoor way to legalizing marijuana when you have this sort of loophole in place.
Well, the first thing is, Patrick, is that you're exactly right. We've taken something that was a criminal charge and made it a civil penalty, like a parking ticket. The minute you give false information to the police, it is now a criminal charge. So there's no reason, to take that kind of risk. The second thing is, that argument is no reason to stop doing something that has just been a social injustice for our city. 91% of everyone arrested for small amounts of marijuana, African American. We've got 6 major universities here. You cannot tell me, not to stereotype, that the only people smoking pot are African Americans predominantly across the river. This is a social justice. I don't care what argument you put up there. We're going to address it. I know that I've got the council with me to do this as well. That's why I'm doing it, is that we're going to undo this social injustice. Once you get a criminal charge for drugs, you've got it the rest of your life.
So why not just legalize it?
Well, what I'm worried about, that's something that we may do. But if the argument of legalization prevents us from taking this first step because Congress steps in or something else happens, then we'll have missed an opportunity. I'm going to get this through. I've got it this far. I've got it out of committee, unanimous vote. We're going to decriminalize marijuana in the district. It's not going to get caught up in the argument about legalization. The argument of legalization will not derail this bill.
We've done medical marijuana. Now we're going to do decriminalization and then ultimately maybe legalization. But Benjamin in Bethesda wants to talk about the subject. But Benjamin, you there?
Yeah, I don't know. This all seems kind of ticky-tack to me. The poll came out this week showing more than 60% support for legalizing marijuana in D.C. Nobody in the field supports it. I just don't understand why nobody does. I mean, it just seems to make sense.
One of the injustices is that we are a federal district. And so Congress puts things in our laws that stop us. You know, we legalized or voted for legalizing medical marijuana 10 years ago, and Congress jammed us up. So,
and Congress is completely paralyzed, though. I mean, I just can't see them passing a bill that's going to
we are
reverse an
not
act of
going to
these
lose this opportunity to correct this injustice of what's going on in our city. I will fully support legalization, but it should go through. I like the referendum. It should go through a citywide discussion. I trust the poll. It's going to pass.
The referendum is only for home grows, so it won't. They can't put it in liquor stores or open up dispensaries. That has to come from the city council.
And I think the city, you know, what we're doing does not prevent that from happening. But just to put together the taxation and regulation scheme will delay implementation for a year or two, while we're still arresting people at a very high rate. You know, to say that
no question. We need to pass the decrim bill now, and we love to see you doing that. Thank you very much.
Then we're on the same page. Got it.
You know, the Congress did not intervene with. A lot of people thought the Congress would intervene with the same-sex marriage, and people said, "Well, we're just going to do it because it's the right thing to do." And people went ahead and did it, and Congress didn't intervene, to the surprise of many people. So is it possible the Congress would be so, as this caller suggested, so entangled among itself that it wouldn't interfere?
I support doing that, but I don't support not doing decriminalization in the meantime. I support that we should take the step towards in providing legalization. Let's also look what happens in Colorado, Washington State, so we can get it right. But yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think the caller's on the right track. I don't think he wants to slow down decriminalization.
Let's talk about soccer. You're injured. Did you play soccer? You ride a bike and you play basketball. Is that it for you?
That's about it, Tom.
Okay. Councilmember Tommy Wells, the soccer deal for Southwest Washington was supposed to be wrapped up, at least the initial parts of it, by the first of the year. It's not. The plans to give a developer, the Ackridge Corporation, the 14th and U Reef Center project in exchange for some land, all those things, the city administrator, Alan Lewis, still trying to wrap up. What's your own thought about what should happen at 14th and U? There's a dispute. Some people want more places to live. Some people want office buildings. I think the council member from Ward 1 wants offices there, not more restaurants. And some people want subsidized housing there. What about the soccer stadium deal itself?
In principle, as you know, I support the soccer stadium at Buzzard Point. But the issue of whenever we use a public asset, public land, should be used to leverage in workforce housing. That we still, you know, Ward 6 has more public housing than any other ward in the city, and we were protecting and upgrading that public housing. But we've lost workforce housing to the city. So when we take the Reef Center, we need to help leverage in we need to help leverage in workforce housing. Now, the mayor said that's laughable and absurd. What he didn't say was that they took my idea to Ackridge to say, how do we leverage in workforce housing? So in terms of our revenue sources, the three-legged stool is income tax, property tax, and sales tax. And that's what, if we bring in workforce housing at the Reef Center site, that we'll get. It's best for the city. The city is actually looking at empty or smaller office buildings. Office buildings, there's not new financing for office buildings. It's, you know, what's best for the city is going to be more housing and more affordable housing. That's
Tommy Wells, Ward 6 council member and a candidate for mayor. Mr. Wells, a proponent of decriminalization of marijuana and seems to be leaning towards legalization someday in the future. I'd like for you to turn to your right and introduce yourself to Angela Also Brooks, who is the prosecutor from Prince George's County. She's opposed to the legalization of marijuana. I'm going to have to find out more about decriminalization, but she's going to be our next guest when you stop talking.
Well, welcome, Angela, and I know that you don't like wasting too much of your jurisdiction's resources on prosecuting people for small amounts of marijuana. And really,
welcome to the program. Do you have any guidance for him before we kick him out of here?
You know, I hate to watch the young people ruin their lives, who I see every single day destroy families, destroy communities, and so it really isn't as harmful as people think. And I have an opportunity, unfortunately, to watch the young people one after another, and many of them start with marijuana and graduate to more dangerous drugs.
What about, and I know Mr. Wells will do it, but I can say it faster, the concern that 90% of the arrests are African Americans and who are charged with possession of marijuana, and it ruins their ability to get into schools, to get jobs. What about that, the harshness of that kind of penalty? Did I do it right, Mr. Wells?
Absolutely. They
Okay.
can't get a commercial driver's license. They can't work on a construction site. And it begins the disenfranchisement of African American youth right off the bat that they'll have the rest of their lives.
Well, 2 points. Diversion is what we usually use for first-time offenders who have opportunities to serve community service, pay a fine, and not be strapped with this conviction. And the other thing is that I sure don't think that the way to help our children succeed is to make it more accessible, drugs more accessible to them. I think providing training, being concerned about education, and some other things make them succeed, but certainly not decriminalizing marijuana.
That's Prince George's County State's Attorney Angela Also Brooks. And Mr. Wells, you can, as you're taking off your headphones and your parting words.
Tom,
as the producer's
a lot of
coming to
people,
get you.
a lot of people are joining my campaign. It's an exciting movement. It's a change election, and you can be a part of it by going to TommyWells.org. To everybody, that's TommyWells.org. Not .com. He's a square dance caller in North Carolina.
All right, good. Thank you very much for coming in.
You bet. Thank you, gentlemen.